遠慮はごめんだぞ。泣くんじゃねえぞ。
Guilty Gear, one of the well-known fighting games that have ever been made. One could even argue that perhaps this fighting game is simply one of the best during its time. But of course, there are some fighting games out there that rivals Guilty Gear's quality back then. Now, speaking as a person who've played the series and several other fighting games before, I can easily say that this game is one of the best during its time. That has a bit of criticism on the PS1 as a fighting game, unfortunately. This is K1PM, and today I'd be doing a full-on review of an old PS1 game that some of you might know, Guilty Gear. I'll be sure to point out on every bit of pros and cons within the game, and talk about the problems that other reviewers have experienced with the game's difficulty. And yes, I'm also gonna cover the absurd things within the game.
殺すはなしです。
The first ever Guilty Gear game was released on May 14, 1998 in Japan, on the PlayStation 1 console, and was soon followed up at these dates in North America and Europe. Guilty Gear was developed by Team Neoblood, that led by Daisuke Ishiwatari under Arc System Works. Yes, I believe you might have heard of them before from these titles that they made soon after. During its time, there were a lot of fierce competition that rivals the fighting game genre, ranging from Marvel vs. Capcom, Street Fighter, Tekken, Bloody Roar, so on and so forth. There are a ton of them back then that grows in popularity throughout. What makes Guilty Gear special that stands out from the rest is not only because of its amazing design and soundtrack within the game, but its take onto a more fast-paced oriented kind of game, with a unique set of mechanics that only has on this fighting game. Compared to the other fighting games, this one was the most stressful yet fulfilling out of all, due to its sheer amount of difficulty, as the game's producer believed that it is necessary to be difficult, and that's why they really crank it up. First of all, it's already been years since I last played this game when I was a kid back then, as well as the last fighting game I've ever played was BlazBlue Central Fiction, and that was around 2016 I believe on the PS4. Now, replaying the game on the PS1 however puts me at a setback, giving me somewhat of a familiar fresh at the start of the game. Kinda took me a while just to get right back at the fighting game genre. I could say I'm quite proficient within the game at least. The characters within the game vary a lot from one another, with the total character roster up to 13, 10 available characters, and 3 hidden ones that can be unlocked through certain conditions, such as beating the game with any given character to unlock Testament and Justice on Versus mode, as well as beating the game using either Soul Bad Guy or Kai Kisk without using any continues. Then you still gotta beat the hidden unlockable character Baiken after the credits roll. Then you'll be able to unlock Baiken afterwards. Some of the characters can be really slow to the point you can't even run nor dash properly within the air. But man, how they can really pack a punch. Just like Potemkin here for instance. Just a few single attacks give out a heavy amount of damage, at the cost of mobility and less likely able to combo with. But Potemkin has its workaround that can beat his opponents despite its downsides, although his movesets can be predictable. Axel's long-range capability of attacks can come in handy, though he isn't the easiest one to do any combos with. The same goes with Dr. Baldhead or Faust later on the series, though I really love some of his moves that could chip away the enemy's health while in a guard position. Cliff's large blade named Dragon Slayer has some advantages that enables him to deal a huge amount of damage at a distance, but being as an old character easily tires him out, making him an easy target as he needs to rest for a bit after several movements were made, or in some very rare cases, might end up damaging himself after a back pain due to overstress. Poor old man. I gotta give credit on how the developers end up adding this little detail within the game. And the rest of them usually lies on speed and technique, having more advantages for them in cornering an opponent. And there's those counter grab movements that could easily disrupt the enemy's aggressive barrage of attacks. The game seemed refreshing, knowing how diverse each of the characters are, especially how characters aren't constrained by a single premise, such as fighting without the use of any weapons. Kinda like how Samurai Showdown or Soul Calibur did back in the days. Personally, I end up using Sol the most since he's one of the main ones I've practiced a lot back then. Should have been Dr. Baldhead or Faust, but his first version is rather a lot different than I used to know. Overall, the game's original character design is outstanding. I love how they design each character with great detail, and especially how diverse they can be, not only in terms of looks, but how each character's movesets vary greatly from one another. Good thing the team decided to scrap the idea for a 3D visual kind of game. Personally, I love the idea of how the character's size affects their hitboxes. Some characters are able to avoid certain attacks, giving them an advantage of it. As well as the characters within the game have a bunch of reference towards heavy metal and rock bands. Seeing though how Daisuke Ishiwatari, the game's producer and composer, is a huge fan of it, you could check out the link down below in the description tab to look more on about it. The developers would even go so far as to give each one of the characters in the game an amazing theme music. The soundtrack is so good that I'd probably rank it around top 5 back then, along with Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Metal Gear Solid, and other remarkable game soundtracks during its time. But one thing is for sure, is that when it comes to the genre of heavy metal or rock music in the game, Guilty Gear is the king of its time when it comes to that. With the number of details that they've put up within the game, every time you win a match versus an AI computer, there's always small bits of dialogue that either just comments about the fight, or it's related between the character's story. It's a nice touch they added for a fighting game that doesn't usually care for the story part, giving more depth on the character's development. Now, onto the 10th stage within the game, there's always a specific boss character that you gotta beat. Goes by the name Testament. Once was a human adopted by Cliff Anderson, but was soon turned onto a gear that now serves the true final boss within the game, Justice. Testament is kinda a bit hard, considering at that point of the game's AI are tougher to beat, while handicaps on damage scaling is already set within the game, though sometimes the AI Testament has some flaws to begin with. Testament isn't that hard to beat, compared to Milia or even Kai's AI can be brutal at higher stages. You think players are the only ones who could spam within a match? Well, think again on this game. Sometimes they'd even spam a ton of attacks at you just for them to win. It can be frustrating at times, but hey, I gotta commend them on how the AI acts like that. It feels a lot like a human of whom I'm fighting with, instead of an AI. But what truly stands above all is the final boss, Justice. Seeing this for the first time when I was a kid back then was chilling. The amount of hype that was built up to this was really big. This is the reason why every time there's a topic about Guilty Gear, Justice always comes into my mind. The amount of excruciating pain that I forced myself just trying to beat Justice. I tried hard non-stop 20 minutes of continuous retries just to defeat Justice using Sol. Soon after, I later on followed up playing the rest of the character story within the game. The true rewarding part of beating the game is how challengingly absurd the game is that I managed to conquer it. Now, I can see why a ton of people are frustrated over this kind of difficulty that the game has. The issue itself isn't merely focused on how hard the AI is. The real issue here was the absurd amount of handicap that they place within the game. Not only does the player receive a ton more damage from the enemy, but how the AI is capable of spamming their special ability in a row. I mean, come on, just look at this. I can't even stand properly just to recover for a bit. Anyone would be frustrated over this kind of concept. I lost more than 70% of my total HP because of it, and I'm still at the 5th stage. Why, game? It gets even worse by the time you're gonna reach at the final boss. Why did the developers do these kind of absurd concepts? Like, I get it why they wanted to make the game much more difficult, but giving the enemy unlimited specials within the story mode that starts on the 5th stage of the game, does that sound fair to you? It does if it's a mission mode, just like on the PS2, but that's not the case, is it? And oh boy, I haven't even touched the destroyability part. What's unique about this game from all the fighting games out there is this destroyability. Once you end up using it on an enemy, you'll completely obliterate your foe, to the point you'll win the whole match despite the number of rounds left. And doing this destroyability is actually quite easy. Just press the square and X button at the same time to hit the enemy, then do this kind of combination. Pretty easy, right? At times, you can also do this through means of countering an enemy's attack. Though I'm not quite sure how, but it's still possible. At first, you might think that this ability can easily be used to abuse the AI to instantly win the whole match, right? Especially against Justice, right? But no, that's not the case. The destroyability only works on the first to fourth stages of the game. If you make it past those stages, the rest seem impossible to pull that off. Well, perhaps it is possible, but so far I wasn't successful on it. The AI seemed to be absolutely capable of stopping your destroyability no matter how hard you try. What makes it worse, the AI can easily do this to you without having the chance of escaping from it when caught at the start. Just imagine how you almost won that single match, until the AI decides to sucker punch you with a destroy finisher all of a sudden, without having the slightest clue on how to avoid or even cancel it. Feels frustrating, right? Then if you try to do the same thing on the AI, they would always able to cancel it. It seems like the odds are really against the player. And you know what's funny? I haven't even activated a hard mode yet for this game. But it still feels insanely difficult because of the absurd amount of handicap placed. Some might call it a cheat trick that developers do to increase the difficulty of the game. After playing every character within a game, I can definitely say that some characters have a problem when it comes to balancing issues. Namely Potemkin, and not because of how just smashing the circle button would end up winning me the game, but how absurd the amount of damage he can deal with at a distance. He already takes less damage compared to the others, and still his moves can be absurd. I was even surprised myself how I ended up beating the game as Potemkin without even losing a single match around 22 minutes. And during those first 22 minutes, I was just checking out his moves on the first few stages of the game. I didn't even do any practice mode, to be honest. If you want to watch the whole video clip of my playthrough as Potemkin, just follow the link down below in the description box. You could see there how absurdly strong Potemkin is. Not only just Potemkin, to be honest, I could see the same thing as the other characters within the game, such as Cliff and Milia for instance. Another thing to take note of within the game's unique feature is the implementation of a charge system. Characters are able to charge at least 3 times that amplifies some of their abilities onto a more improved versions. Though once you end up using it, it'll revert to its original version, making you have to charge yet again. There are other notable downsides that the game has, such as how poorly made the practice mode is. There wasn't even enough details or customizability that can be seen there. Not to mention you can't even at least see the command list there. While the command list itself that can be seen within the loading screen isn't enough, to be honest. The game doesn't show you how to do each of the characters special. You'll have to guess the character special by trying out any possible combinations back then. Or you could just buy some magazine guides to look at their full combinations back in the days. And that's kind of a hustle, to be honest, while that's already outside of the game. Or you could just look it up at the internet at GameFAQs. Yeah, the old trusty website is still there. Like, how would anyone be able to guess that this combination would be for Justice Special? It's kinda absurd when you think about it. Those hidden unlockable characters can only be played through versus mode or practice mode, which can really be a bummer, to be honest. Why can't it be the same as the other fighting games out there, where hidden characters have their own special ending that can be played in normal mode? It just feels disappointing, to be honest. There are 2 bugs in particular that I really need to talk about before going through the rating part of this review. Hitboxes can be inaccurate at times. In some cases, these kind of events happen, which can really be annoying at times. As well as both sides end up having problems when facing each other, as in literally. From time to time, you'll experience some of these problems on the long run, like air dashing backwards, as if moonwalking wasn't enough. That's why I rate this game an 8.3 out of 10. Overall, the game is actually great. Top-notch character and level design, one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard back in the days, fast-paced battle with very controllable movements, as well as that destroyability idea as a unique flair within the game. The story seemed decent enough for a fighting game. It's just what made the game fall to its downsides is the ridiculous handicaps that they applied for the normal or story mode, as well as the balancing of characters should have put more thought into it. And for a fighting game, that's actually a huge deal that needs to be reconsidered. You know, I wish they should have placed a complete command list for every character out of conveniency. The ones on the loading screen before a fight weren't exactly enough, to be honest. If you're thinking on trying out the game yourself, luckily Arc System Works managed to port the game for the PC. You can buy and try it out at Steam. Would I recommend you on playing this game? I highly suggest you choose the Guilty Gear Accent Core Plus instead on Steam. I surely hope you enjoyed the whole video with me talking about it. Be sure to leave a comment down below and subscribe to my channel if you're looking for a more accurate game review of the past games before. But of course, I also do new ones from time to time. Be sure to check it out later on. You could also leave a like and share the video through online if you wanna. It kinda really helps out my channel to grow any further. But yeah, thanks again for watching the video. This is K1PM and I bid you farewell.